Okay, let's take a look at demand. Now, this is a basic introduction, but it will also talk about what is the relationship between price and quantity. What is the difference between a movement along a demand curve and a shift in a demand curve? Okay, so these are fundamental concepts. So let's start off with a basic definition. So demand is the ability and willingness of consumers to pay a given price for a given product at a given time. Okay, so think about that. There has to be a time element. There has to be a specific product in mind. So it focuses on a specific market. And the two really key words in that definition are able and willing. So if you are able and willing to pay, this is what we call effective demand. That if you take away one of those elements, then demand doesn't exist. The consumer will not buy the product. So if you are willing but unable, then you won't buy it. If you are able but unwilling, you won't buy it. Okay, so those two things have to be there for it to be called effective demand. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is this: look at the relationship between price and quantity. If the price is relatively high, then the quantity demanded is relatively low. If the price is low, then the quantity demanded is relatively high. So this relationship, which is called an inverse relationship, gives us a downward sloping demand curve. Okay? Now, I've just represented that as a 45-degree angle, but we know from elasticity and price elasticity that that angle can be steeper or flatter depending on the price elasticity of demand. But let's not leave that for the moment. Now, let's say, for example, we have a product that is priced at $5 and we have 10 consumers that are willing and able to buy it. Now, obviously, that's simplified numbers. Okay. Now, take this principle. We know we've got a price of 5, we've got 10 consumers, so we know we're going to get a revenue of $50, right? Now, what happens when our price falls? So if our price falls, we know that we are going to see a greater number of consumers because more consumers are now willing and able to pay the price for that product. Okay? This is what we call a movement along a demand curve. It is effectively created by a change in the price of the product. It moves that way. It's called an extension of demand or a contraction of demand. Okay, so we see that we're actually seeing a shift, a movement along the demand curve, or we see that demand reduces. Now, this is what happens when there is a change in price. Okay, and that's called a movement. But we also know that when we have what we call a non-price determinant, that means something else changes, not price, then we will see that we have, say that's at $5 and that's at 10. Now, let's change something else. Let's leave the price at 5, but let's think, what might change which will make more people buy the product or less people buy the product? So, let's use a basic example. Let's say there is the demand for, let's say, apples. Let's suggest there is a newspaper article that is released that suggests that apples are extremely good for you and you should eat as many apples as you can every day. Okay? This is an external factor. The price of apples remains the same, but more people buy apples. More people decide that's a great idea, let's buy more apples. And what we see is not a movement, but we see the entire demand curve shifts to the right. Okay? There is more demand in the market for those products at that price. And that price stays the same, but we see, say, for example, an increase of the demand for that good. Okay? So there are different factors that could change that will make a shift occur. So we need to think about certain things. So the price of substitute goods might change. Okay, so if you are selling apples and the price of bananas change or the price of pears change, that will have an impact on your demand for apples. Now, of course, this could be a shift to the right or it could be a shift to the left. It could be a reduction in demand or it could be an increase. It's exactly the same, it just goes the other way. Now, not only could the price of a substitute change, but people's incomes could change in an economy. So, for example, I may get an overall price increase, a wage increase. Right? Now, what does that mean? It means I've got more disposable income, and I may go out and spend that money, in this case, on apples. I might say, oh, I've got loads of money, what should I spend it on? I know, I'll go and buy some more apples. Okay, so people's incomes increasing may increase the demand for certain products. It will also work the other way. So if my wages are decreased, I might say, oh, I can't afford to buy as many apples as I could before. I'm still willing, but I'm not able. Right? So we see this shifting of the demand curve. So we've got a change in the price of substitute goods. We've got a change, and not just substitute goods, but complementary goods as well. We've got a change in people's incomes, and we've got lots of smaller external factors as well, like the example of increased marketing or good news concerning that particular product within the economy. But those are the big ones, okay? Changes in people's incomes, changes in the price of other goods, complementary goods, or substitute goods, okay? So these will create a shift in demand to the right, or they could create a shift to demand to the left, okay? So keep that in mind. This basic introduction to demand. You need to go on and think about what that means in terms of not only do I need to understand how a movement works, but what might create a shift. And often you'll have to recognize, oh, consumers have changed their buying behavior. What has caused that? Is it a change in price, or is it a change in a non-price factor which would cause a shift? Okay, next.